Welcome and thank you for joining me. Joe Brady here, and we are going to go through a demonstration on recovering or reshaping a raw file. This is Bass Harbor Light in Acadia National Park. And if you take a look at the histogram, let's take a look at this first. Up in here, you can see it really probably couldn't have been better because what was critical here was saving the clouds. Got to have the detail in the clouds. And if you look up on the right-hand side, this is the highlight clipping. There is no highlight clipping. It's not lit up. In the shadow clipping over here, it is showing that there are some things that are 100% black. But look where they are. They're actually down underneath the bottom of these rocks. Guess what? They probably were 100% black, so certainly not a worry there. But let's start by just doing some basic adjustments in the basic panel to bring some life back into this shot. We'll start by bringing the highlights all the way down, even though they look pretty good, but we need to bring the shadows all the way up. Now, you can see the tone is starting to get better, but it's still way too dark now. So let's bring the exposure up. I'm going to go up quite a bit. Let's see where I'm looking at the histogram up here and just pushing the exposure until it gets close to the right edge, but not quite. And I think about right there. Now, the image does look flat and dull at this point, but now we have to restore the other stuff that it needs to bring it to life. I'm going to add a little bit of texture, a little bit of clarity. Oh, we'll add a little bit of dehaze too, which will bring some of the contrast back. But what it really needs is the color restored. I'm going to add a bunch of vibrance, which will increase the saturation of cool and desaturated colors. Oh, about right there. And then saturation, and that will bring all of the colors up equally, I think. Oh, I think about right there. And I can live with that. That's not too shabby. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a virtual copy, which is Command apostrophe, so that I can reset this one, and we can quickly go back and forth and see we just did that to that by moving those sliders. Now, you might think, well, gee, I'm done. But you're not done, because there's a couple other things we can do to make this even better. Let's take a look. Now, you weren't here with me, but I was paying attention to these rocks. And the rocks were much warmer and saturated than we're seeing here. Why does that happen? Well, your camera can only capture one color temperature. And this captured a little bit slightly to the blue side, considering it was getting close to sunset. Why? I had the ocean and the sky here. And you can see the color temperatures at 5400. But I don't want to change the color temperature. I just want to bring the life back in these rocks. So we're going to use a mask to do that. So I'm going to click on this, which is the masking panel. Click on a brush. I want to make sure auto mask is on and my flow is at 100%. And I'm going to just drag through here. Now let's scroll down to color, and I want to add some more yellow back into there. And that already looks great. That's really what it looked like. As I look at this, I don't like the green grass here and some of the green here. It's a little too light, a little too yellow, a little too saturated. So let's create a new mask with the brush, and I'll make my brush size a little smaller. And I'm going to drag through there. Yeah, those are the problem areas. And this is a little too light for me. And over here as well, let's bring this down, and even these trees here. So I mentioned it was too yellow, which means we need to add blue to it. So let's add some blue. That looks better. I'm going to bring down the saturation because I thought it was a little too saturated. And I'm going to bring the exposure down a little bit, because we want to focus on the lighthouse, which, speaking of the lighthouse is too blue. Again, this is getting close to sunset. There's a little bit of a glow here, so we need to create a new mask again. By the way, notice all of these adjustments have keyboard shortcuts. Brush is K, linear gradient is M, radial gradient is Shift M. You're going to learn those. It just saves you some time you can just type K and it will create a new mask for you automatically. So let's select the lighthouse itself. So I just drag around the lighthouse. So there's our lighthouse selected. I mentioned it was too blue, so let's go down to color. And the opposite of blue is yellow. Let's add some warmth. I don't want to make it yellow. That would be weird. But what I want to do is I want to cancel out some of the blue. I want to make it a little more neutral, maybe slightly warm. And that has the effect of, since it's a different color temperature, that actually draws attention to it and makes it seem a little bit closer. All right, as we do that, I think it needs a little bit of contrast in the lighthouse. And what else? Maybe a little bit of clarity. Let's add some clarity, which will add some fine mid-tone contrast to that. And some saturation. Let's boost the saturation a little bit. Yes, that looks much better. Now let's zoom in on the lighthouse. In fact, I'm just going to hit enter a couple times. First, let's zoom in on the lighthouse and see what's going on there. Looks pretty good. Ooh, I've got a spot in the sky. We got to fix that. Now, when we did this, remember we took this from pretty dark. It's not terrible, but there's a little bit of grain noise in here that I want to fix. Now, we could completely denoise the entire image, but I want to do it specifically for the lighthouse here. So I'm going to hit the K key, and it's mostly on the dark side. This part is fine. So let's go ahead and select this side of the lighthouse. Again, auto mask is on, so it pretty much stays in. Now I got this one window here. Doesn't hurt that it's there, but I'll hold down the Alt key to give us a minus to deselect the stuff on the front. And here's what I'm going to do. I actually want to add a little more contrast to this side to make it a little bit darker. Then we will scroll down to the detail sliders, and I'm going to bring down the sharpness and increase noise reduction right there. Now, while I'm at that, I'm going to increase the clarity a little more. That'll boost the contrast, but we've also been able to get rid of the noise. Also, the lighthouse top, this black part, has gotten a little bit too light, and you can see some grain in there as well. So let's hit K again. I'll make the brush a little smaller, and I want to get this real dark black parts of the lighthouse, I think up in here as well. Oh, there's people up in the lighthouse and didn't even notice that. And I think those areas need to come down, so let's scroll up to exposure, and let's bring that down a bit. Yeah, that needs to be darker. And we'll do the same noise reduction here. Sharpness down, noise reduction up. Great. Let's hit enter on that. Good. Let's zoom out. Yes, that looks great. Now let's deal with the sky. First of all, let's get rid of our spots. So spot removal is this Band-Aid looking thing. It's also the Q key. I don't know who came up with that shortcut. And if we hit the A key, it will do what's called visualize spots. Let's zoom in to 50%. And whenever you see a perfectly round circle, in fact, let's go to 100%. When you see a perfectly round circle like that, that means spot. And you can hit the A key to toggle on and off, and you'll see, yeah, that's a spot. So I make my spot selector just a little bigger than the spot itself. I'm on the default spot removal, so we'll do that. Now, there are some other things that may or may not be spots. Is this a spot? Is that a spot? That's where having the A key handy is great, because you can take a look and see if it's actually a spot or not. So up in the navigator here, we can drag around. Ooh, and I see a couple other things that are slightly spotty. There's one there. There's one there. What else? If it looks like a spot, get rid of it. Even if it's not a spot, if it looks like one, it needs to go. And I find that if you slowly move around, that's where you can kind of see them. All right, I think we got them. Speaking of the sky, I don't like the sky color. It's a little too pale. So let's go up to the mask panel again. We'll click on Create New Mask, and we're going to select the sky. I think the sky needs a little more blue, so let's come down to the color slider. Let's add a little bit of blue to it. Yeah, that looks a lot better already. In fact, that might all be all it needs. I think the saturation is pretty good, maybe a smidge more. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now, when you consider that we started with this just a couple of minutes ago and have brought that to here, I think we've had a success. But let's fine-tune it and make it a little bit better. What I'm going to do is to create a light path to start. I'm just going to hit the K key again for our brush. This time we're going to turn off auto mask. And I want a bigger brush. I'm going to start down here, and I'm just going to draw a path up to our lighthouse, and maybe even select the lighthouse too. Even got a little of the sky around it. That's okay. I want to subtly increase the exposure on that. It's very subtle, But look at the difference as we bring that up. And what it does is it creates a light path, and it's subliminal up to the subject. Now, also to counter that, not to counter that as an kind of an opposite of that, I'm going to come down to the effects panel and add a little bit of a vignette, which will subtly darken the edges. And let's look at it full screen real quick. And that looks pretty darn good, especially when you consider there's our raw file that we started with. And this is what we were able to bring life back to it with. Now, I haven't done any sharpening yet. Let's go ahead and do that as well. That's under the detail panel. This little button here will allow us to pick what spot. Let's go up to the lighthouse I can see there. I'm going to add a bunch of sharpening to bring out the fine details. But when you sharpen, you're also adding noise to the flat areas like the sky. So to counteract that, hold down the Alt key, because there's a masking slider here, but you really can't see what it's doing very well. Hold down the Alt key and then click on the masking slider. And as we drag over, you can see now it's only sharpening those things in white. So it's only sharpening the edges, and we'll leave our sky alone. And I think that is great. Now, one last thing. Can we make this even better? Now, this is good. I'm very happy with this. I could certainly be done with this. But let's try one thing to see if we can make the lighthouse even a little bit more prominent in the scene. And I'm going to create 2 virtual copies. Again, Command apostrophe twice. And what I'm after is a different crop. So let's try the crop tool here. And let's choose a 16 by 9 vertical, which is a very thin, tall shape. And I'm going to bring it in from the bottom and from the top. I'm going to push over to the left a little bit because I want to maintain the water. And I don't want to cut off this one tree on the edge. Also, getting the lighthouse off to the right a little bit creates a little more motion to the scene. And so there's our original, there's our crop. And notice by doing the crop, since the lighthouse is now taking up more physical area in the frame, it actually appears a little bit larger. Now, have we lost too much here? Not sure. Let's go over to our other virtual copy, and let's try one more. I'm going to click on this one. This is a custom size that I made because I have a printer here that prints on legal size paper, which is 8.5 by 14, which is not quite as skinny as the 16 by 9, but it's a standard size. It's a standard paper size. And I also have mats in 8.5 by 14 with a 12 by 18 outside that is a standard frame size. And we all know the benefits of that. And that's good. In fact, when we compare that against the real skinny one, look how small the difference is. Yet, I think this one maintains a little bit more of the surrounding area. And also notice that our crop, let's come down to our effects again. Our crop is still on. And if we hide it, you can see it's still there. That's the beauty of the crop in Lightroom because it follows the vignette rather, because it follows your crop. I think we can be done here. I'm really happy with how this has turned out. Let's do a quick tour of where we traveled during this little demonstration. So here's the raw file. I love this scene. And by the way, this is kind of as far left as you can get in this because the next step to the left would put you in the ocean. So this is if you've ever seen this lighthouse before, this is the place you photograph it from because you have to, unless you're on a boat. That's what we turned our raw file into just by bringing up sliders and doing a little bit of light painting. We tried 2 more crops. So here's the full frame. Here's a 16 by 9. Interesting, but I think we've possibly lost just a little bit too much of the surrounding area. However, if you had a really tall, thin wall space, this is something that could work. It almost looks like it's basically a vertical panorama. But just backing off on the crop a little bit to our legal shape brings back enough of the surrounding area that you get a better flavor going from there to there. And the lighthouse hasn't lost really any of its prominence from the scene. So again, we started there. And I think that's our Goldilocks one. I think that's a little too thin, a little too thick maybe A little too much around, not quite enough. Perfect. So there's your hot, cold, perfect right in the middle. And I think that's the solution. So that's it. That's our demonstration of Bass Harbor Lighthouse in Acadia National Park. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope you learned something you can put to use on your own images. Thanks for joining me today. I wish you a great week, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.